Yo, what's good guys? Welcome back. For those of you joining for the first time, I'm making a samurai game that's kind of like a cross between Hotline Miami, Samurai Champloo, and Cowboy Bebop. And I strongly recommend that you play my games, because in the future, video games are going to be considered the highest art form. They will be studied and taught in classrooms around the world, and my games are going to be required playing. Now let's take a look at what I worked on this week. I went through each of the levels that'll be in the demo and added some final touches to the lighting. Mainly I added some static shadows to some objects, gave the outdoor areas a more bluish moonlight type of hue, and applied the same to some of the volumetric rays coming from the windows. The most significant change was in the third level. I had it more brightly lit before, trying to go for a sunlight at dusk kind of look, but the enemies in this level blend really well with the background, and that lack of contrast didn't feel good during gameplay. So instead I kept the idea of an evening sunlight color scheme, but put it in a darker nighttime atmosphere. Added some flickering candles, and now I think it looks really great and gives the level a unique feel. This level features the dashing enemy type, and another change I made this week was to make your dodge more useful against them. If you dodge through these enemies, they will always take a swing at you and miss, which will give you a longer opening than you normally get to kill them. In the top right corner, you'll take note of the combo counter. We updated the combo meter sprite to something nicer. I improved the transitions between pages in the pause menu, and I added a nice dissolve effect and animation to the mouse cursor instead of just having it instantly appear and disappear. Over in Jones's Bar, you'll be making upgrade choices between passive upgrades that boost your stats and new items, and this week we added a drink icon for the passive upgrade, and I added a little extra flair that plays once you've made your choice. My animator Maria is in the process of making an animation for the consumption of your upgrade, and I added a small icon to the HUD during gameplay that'll indicate which passive upgrades you have active. I was originally thinking of making custom icons for that, like a little running icon for movement speed for example, but I thought that might be confusing to players if they forget what it's supposed to be or where it came from, so I thought it'd make more sense to just show the drink icons. It should be easier for players to make the connection that way. Back in Jones's Bar again, one incredibly crucial new detail is that I added water to the toilet. Normally when you have conversations with characters, you choose between 3 color-coded dialogue options that will determine your personality and sometimes what kinds of reactions you get from other characters throughout the game. But I needed a non-colored version for choices that are not personality dependent, so we have that here for example when you ask somebody if they want to play a game of foosball. That's right, you'll be able to play foosball against any of the characters. I completely finished polishing and balancing the minigame for that. Each character has his own unique strategy, and most importantly of all, yes, that includes playing foosball against Spike, the world's first foosball playing dog. And finally, we have our final character design for the game's second act. She is technically the game's third samurai boss because the second act includes 2 of them, the first being Damien, who I introduced last week, and this week it is Violet. Violet works together with Damien and is his questionable romantic interest. She has a preference for fighting from a distance, using a miniature crossbow attached to her wrist and throwing knives on her belt, along with a long dagger that she holds onto just in case. She may seem pitiful to some extent, but you'd best not be fooled by her. So I'm super excited about where the game's at now. I've said it before, but it's still true. We're getting so much closer to the first proper demo playtests. I think there's just one last week of work this week before I can finally get into focusing 100% on the game's audio. I've got a bunch of music to produce. I need some more sound effects for my sound guy, Lorenzo. And then we've got all the voice lines to record. And then fingers crossed, that should be pretty much it. Now I've been talking a lot recently about how amazing I am, and I thought you guys might want to know that a few years ago I saw a therapist for a couple months, and the therapist thought it might be helpful to have me do a psych test that checks for various personality traits. When the test came back, I scored fairly low on being a sociopath or a psychopath and some other stuff like that. However, I scored above average on narcissism. This came as no surprise to me. After all, I am a genius, and quite frankly, I had already figured out all of my problems on my own anyway, so I immediately fired her. All jokes aside, my experience with going to therapy led me to develop some opinions on the effectiveness of therapy and the place that it's taken in popular culture. It's not uncommon nowadays to hear people say that everyone should go to therapy, and if you go on a date with someone and they tell you they went to therapy, that is a green flag. Well, I'm here to tell you that if somebody tells you they went to therapy, it's just as likely to be a massive red flag. I wasn't joking when I said that I figured out most of my problems on my own. Late one night a few years ago, I was thinking about a past relationship and analyzing my thought patterns and why I had behaved the way that I had in some situations, and suddenly I had this epiphany. I realized that there was something bizarre about the way that I thought about things sometimes, and I started investigating internally. Why did I think like this? Where does this come from? Do other people think like this? Is that why so many other people in my life behave this way too? And eventually I realized that my perception of my entire life up to this point had been delusional. I would describe the whole experience as feeling like waking up from a 3-decade-long nightmare that I didn't even know was a nightmare. It was this amazing realization that my life could be so much more than what it was, that there were understandable reasons why I had certain weaknesses and traits that I didn't like about myself, and that I can change myself and be who I want to be and live whatever life I want to live, so long as I understand why I am the way that I am and be willing to make some radical changes to put myself in a place where I can change. At one point during this experience, the realizations I was making were so psychologically overwhelming. I thought that maybe almost every friendship and relationship I had ever had in my life wasn't really what I thought it was, and I wasn't really the person I thought I was, and I felt the need to talk to a professional about it. But this was in the middle of the COVID quarantine years, and psychologists and therapists everywhere were completely booked, so I put myself on some waiting lists and just kept dealing with it. I read books and watched videos on the subject and worked through it. And by the time I was able to get an appointment, it felt like I had gotten through it all and I understood everything and the changes I needed to make in my life, but I thought I should go and talk to someone anyway, if for no other reason than just to have an impartial person I can lay this all out to and say, I'm not crazy, right? This all makes sense, I haven't lost my mind. Ironically, asking for other people's opinions and approval before doing things was one of my many weaknesses. But anyway, I started seeing this therapist and I tell her my life story, and I have thought through my situation so thoroughly and from every possible angle that she doesn't really have much to do other than sit there and say, yep, yeah, that's a good point, yeah, that makes sense, yeah. And the reason why she gave me that psych test I mentioned is because I told her that I wanted to make sure that I understood everything about myself. I had been so delusional about myself for so long, I wanted to make sure that there was absolutely nothing left that I was hiding from or ignorant of. Ultimately, I didn't have anything to learn from these sessions, but it was still worth it because it gave me someone to talk to, and it helped assure me that I was on the right track. So, what is my problem? Why am I telling you that if somebody says they went to therapy, it might actually be a red flag? Well, while I was in those therapy sessions, I got the distinct impression that if I wanted to, I could have easily fooled that therapist. I could have told her that every single one of my problems was caused by somebody else, that everything was everybody else's fault except my own. I could have painted every person I've ever interacted with as a villain, and unless she was an exceptionally insightful person, she would have no idea that I'm manipulating her to get her to see things from my delusional and self-centered point of view. And I think a lot of people do this. Now, some of the problems in my life were caused by other people, but I didn't go to therapy to blame my problems on other people. I went to figure out how I can change. I only care about how other people affect me insofar as I need to know that to be able to change, but beyond that, it doesn't matter. Maybe I did become a certain kind of person because of something that happened to me when I was 10 years old, but at the age of 30, I'm not that kind of person because of that. I'm that kind of person because I choose to keep being that person. There's a kind of contradiction that exists here. As soon as I know that I act in some negative way because of something that happened in the past, I now have the power to change that. So if I don't, that's not the fault of the person that hurt me, that's my fault. They're responsible for what they did back then, but I'm responsible for what's happening now. Maybe to be able to change, I need to do something about this person, distance myself from them, confront them, whatever, but that's so that I can change and not so that I can take revenge or absolve myself of my responsibilities and pass it on to them. And I personally have known way too many people with deep-seated problems who went and saw a therapist and came out of it not having changed at all in any way that I could see, except for one. They now have a whole arsenal of sophisticated ways to blame other people for their problems. I know people who came out of therapy saying, I had the most profound insight. It turns out, I act the way that I do because of this other person in my life. I feel so much better now that I understand that. And these are people for whom I could make a list of ridiculous things I know they've done that could not possibly be explained as being somebody else's fault. There's no doubt in my mind that these people didn't share almost anything about the awful things they had done in their life, or if they did, they found a way to spin the story. And if therapists don't have access to any point of view other than the one being pushed by the patient, many of them are bound to be fooled by what's really going on in this person's life, and then how can they be helpful? On the contrary, they might unknowingly help this person rationalize their poor behavior. Honestly, I've even dated people who were seeing therapists, and eventually I could see what their problems were and where they were coming from and how oblivious they were to them, and I couldn't help but wonder, what has this person's therapist been telling them? How much are they paying these people? Or perhaps most importantly, what have they been telling their therapist? To get something useful out of therapy, you need to either be a person with the right mindset and attitude, or you need an exceptionally good and insightful psychologist, which, like with any specialized field, is going to be very difficult to find. Some people think that if you go and you gain some kind of profound insight in your therapy sessions, that's it. That'll automatically change you and you come out feeling like a new person, but that's a temporary feeling and not how it works. Going to therapy is like going to see a doctor, and the doctor tells you you're fat so you need to eat healthy and go to the gym. You are not cured just because he gave you that insight. You have to actually go and do that now. And by the way, you need to do that for the rest of your life, because as soon as you stop, your problems are going to come right back. Now, going to the gym and eating healthy is hard enough. The 70% obesity rate in the United States is proof of that. And I can tell you the kind of stuff you have to do to help yourself psychologically, the kinds of radical choices you might have to make, especially if you have a lot of deeper problems, is 10 times harder. Going to the gym just means overcoming your tendency to want to be lazy, for example, but consciously observing yourself and making a constant mental effort to change your thought patterns and your behaviors is a matter of overcoming decades of conditioning and patterns you've been following your whole life. And just like how you don't need a doctor to tell you to eat healthy and go to the gym, you don't necessarily need a therapist to tell you your problems if you're able to be ruthlessly honest and non-judgmental with yourself. Non-judgmental is important because you might not want to be honest with yourself if it's going to make you feel guilty or ashamed of yourself or of others. So, how many people who go to see a therapist have the right attitude, the open mind, the honesty, the willingness to confront their darkest selves? How many people have you known in your life that you could say honestly fit that description? And how many of those people are going to put the effort in to make difficult changes? And how many of the therapists are sufficiently talented and skilled to help the people who tend to deceive themselves and others? If I came off very cynical here, I don't mean to be. If you have more extreme psychological issues, you certainly should find an experienced psychologist if you can. And if you're more like me, or maybe even don't have too many big problems, I'd say that confronting the darkest parts of yourself with a ruthless honesty and a non-judgmental mindset is the best thing you can do for yourself. Understanding yourself on every level is the most important thing you need to be able to make the most positive changes you can make in your life. And if you find you struggle with this, or maybe you're just not that self-aware or insightful on your own, by all means see a therapist. I just want people to understand that getting the most out of it is something that is very painful and difficult and requires a very deliberate attitude. And to be wary of anyone who treats it casually, who says they went to see a therapist, had a moment of insight, and now everything is perfect and all their problems are solved forever, or who talks about it like anyone and everyone should be doing it, and anyone who does it is automatically a green flag, and all this kind of nonsense. And especially be wary of those who say the only thing they learned is how all their problems are somebody else's fault. And with that said, if Six Samurai does not end up becoming an overwhelming success, I'm gonna blame it all on you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you'll join me here again next week, and have yourself a good night. Peace.